At 2 a.m. on a rainy Monaco night, eight-time Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton made a discovery that would shake the racing world to its core, driving through empty streets, unable to sleep. He spotted a familiar face huddled against a bakery, while his former rival from Formula 3, Marcus Anderson, holding a baby. 20 years earlier, Marcus had beaten Lewis for the championship by 3 points, launching what should have been a brilliant F1 career. Instead, he had vanished from racing entirely. Now Lewis found him homeless, desperate, and carrying secrets that threatened to destroy everything Lewis had built. What Lewis did next would force him to choose between his legendary reputation and saving thousands of innocent lives. In less than 24 hours, he would have to decide whether to protect the sport he loved or expose a conspiracy so dangerous that it reached the highest levels of Formula One. The decision he made left the entire racing world speechless and changed motorsport forever. The rain drummed against the windshield of Lewis Hamilton's black Mercedes as he drove through the narrow streets of Monaco at 2 a.m. Sleep had become his enemy again. Even after winning his 8th Formula One championship 3 months ago in Abu Dhabi, his mind refused to quiet down. At 39, the weight of being the most successful driver in F1 history felt heavier than any trophy. The streets were empty except for the occasional taxi carrying late-night party-goers back to their hotels. Lewis had been driving aimlessly for an hour, letting his car take him wherever it wanted. These midnight drives had become his ritual when the pressure got too much. The quiet roads gave him space to think about things he couldn't discuss with anyone else. His therapist had told him it was normal to feel lost after achieving your biggest dreams. "What do you do when you've reached the top of the mountain?" she had asked during their last session. Lewis still didn't have an answer. As he turned onto Rue Grimaldi, a side street near the harbor that most tourists never saw, his headlights caught something that made him slam on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the wet pavement before coming to a stop. There, huddled against the stone wall of a closed bakery, was a man holding what looked like a bundle of blankets. But it wasn't the homeless situation that shocked Lewis. Sadly, even wealthy Monaco had its share of people living rough. It was the face he recognized instantly. Despite the matted blonde hair and 3 weeks of stubble, Marcus Anderson. Lewis sat frozen in his car, staring at the man who had once been his fiercest rival. His mind flew back 20 years to the Formula 3 European Championship of 2003. Marcus had been everything Lewis wasn't back then: tall, confident, smooth with the media, and devastatingly fast on track. The golden boy of Danish motorsport who seemed destined for Formula One greatness. They had battled wheel to wheel through an entire season, trading wins and heated words with equal intensity. Lewis could still remember the taste of champagne mixed with disappointment when Marcus beat him to the championship by just 3 points at the final race in Hockenheim. It had been the closest title fight in F3 history. But that wasn't what made Lewis's hands shake as he gripped the steering wheel. What sent ice through his veins was realizing that the bundle Marcus held so protectively wasn't blankets at all. Even through the rain and darkness, Lewis could see it was a baby. Lewis rolled down his window, raindrops immediately hitting his face. "Marcus," he called softly, not wanting to startle him. The man looked up, and Lewis saw recognition flash in those same ice-blue eyes that used to stare him down at starting grids across Europe. But now they were hollow, desperate, filled with a fear Lewis had never seen before. "Lewis." Marcus's voice cracked like he hadn't used it in days. I didn't think you'd remember me." "Of course I remember you." Lewis turned off his engine and stepped out into the rain, not caring that his expensive tracksuit was getting soaked. "You beat me to the F3 title. How could I forget?" The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, one of the wealthiest athletes in the world, standing in designer clothes in the rain, talking to the man who had once been his equal, now living on the streets. "What happened, mate?" Lewis moved closer, speaking gently like he would to a frightened animal. "And is that my daughter?" Marcus whispered, adjusting the pink blanket around the sleeping infant. "Emma, she's 6 months old." Lewis felt his heart crack. In all his years of fame and success, he had seen poverty and suffering around the world, had donated millions to charity, had spoken out about inequality. But this was different. This was personal. This was someone from his own world, his own past, reduced to sleeping rough with a baby. "How long have you been?" Louis couldn't finish the sentence. The words seemed too cruel to say out loud. 3 weeks, Marcus said, looking down at his daughter with such tenderness that Louis had to look away. "Since I lost my job at the marina. The rent here is impossible. And with Emma's medical bills." He trailed off, his voice breaking. Louis had always wondered what happened to Marcus after that championship season. The Dane had seemed destined for Formula One, just like Louis himself. But Marcus had simply vanished from the racing world, and Louis had been too focused on climbing his own ladder to look back. Now he wished he had. "Medical bills?" Louis asked. "She was born premature. Spent 2 months in intensive care." Marcus's voice was barely audible. Above the rain, the bills kept coming even after Sarah died. The name hung in the air between them. Louis didn't need to ask who Sarah was. The pain in Marcus's eyes told him everything. "I'm sorry," Louis said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He looked down at Emma, who had started to stir in her blanket. Even in the dim light from the street lamp, Louis could see she was beautiful, blonde hair like her father, but softer features that must have come from her mother. Louis made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on," he said, opening the passenger door of his Mercedes. "You're coming with me." Marcus hesitated, his body tensing like he was ready to run. "Louis, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling. Get in the car, both of you." "But you don't understand. This isn't just about being homeless. There are people." Marcus looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "People who don't want me found." Louis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. What kind of people? The kind that don't forgive. The kind that don't forget. Marcus clutched Emma tighter. "I've been running for 20 years, Louis. That's why I disappeared after F3. That's why I could never go back to racing." "Running from what?" Marcus looked directly at Louis for the first time since they'd started talking. In his eyes, Louis saw not just desperation, but terror. "From the truth about why I really beat you for that championship, and from the people who made sure it happened." Before Louis could ask what he meant, Emma started to cry. The sound echoed off the empty street, a baby's wail cutting through the night like an alarm. "Please," Marcus said urgently. "We need to get her somewhere warm and dry. I'll explain everything, but not here, not in the open." Louis didn't hesitate. Whatever secrets Marcus was carrying, whatever dangerous people he was running from, none of that mattered right now. What mattered was a 6-month-old baby crying in the rain, and a man who had once been his equal now broken by 20 years of fear. "Get in," Louis said again. "We'll figure out the rest later." As they drove through the empty streets of Monaco toward Louis's penthouse, Louis stole glances at his former rival in the passenger seat. Marcus sat rigidly, constantly checking the mirrors, his free hand never leaving the baby carrier where Emma had fallen back asleep. Louis had thought his biggest problems were deciding whether to retire from racing and finding meaning beyond the track. Now he realized he was about to learn what real problems looked like, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that his carefully constructed life was about to change forever. Louis's penthouse apartment overlooked Monte Carlo's harbor, where million-dollar yachts bobbed like floating palaces in the gentle waves. As Marcus and baby Emma settled into the guest room, Louis found himself staring out at the lights reflecting on the water, his mind spinning with memories he hadn't thought about in years. Back in 2003, they had been roommates at the McLaren Young Driver Academy in Woking, England. Both were 18, both hungry for success, and both absolutely convinced they were destined for Formula One greatness. The academy had paired them together, thinking competition would make them both better drivers. They were right, but not in the way anyone expected. "You remember our old room?" Louis asked as he brought Marcus a steaming cup of tea. Marcus nodded, carefully feeding Emma her bottle with practiced ease. "Room 247. You used to stay up all night watching race videos on that tiny laptop, and you used to sneak out to the hallway to make phone calls. I always wondered who you were talking to." A shadow crossed Marcus's face. "Just family back home." But Louis remembered it differently. He remembered the hushed conversations in Danish, the way Marcus would pace the narrow hallway with the phone pressed tight to his ear. The worried look that would cloud his features afterward. Sometimes, Marcus would come back to their room looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Tell me what really happened after F3, Lewis said gently, settling into the chair across from them. "One day you were signing with a Formula One team, and the next you just disappeared." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter drink. Emma's tiny hands gripped the bottle, her blue eyes staring up at her father with complete trust. The sight made Lewis's chest tight with emotion. "I got called up to McLaren's F1 program." "Same as you," Marcus said finally. "Ron Dennis himself offered me the contract, development driver position, with a clear path to a race seat within 2 years." Lewis knew this part of the story. They had both been offered development driver positions with McLaren in 2004. Lewis had taken his opportunity and slowly worked his way up to a race seat by 2007. But Marcus, I turned it down. Marcus said quietly. "What? Why?" Lewis nearly dropped his tea. "That was everything we dreamed about since we were kids. Because I got a phone call the night before I was supposed to sign. Someone from Denmark. They told me things about my family that I couldn't ignore." Lewis waited, sensing there was much more to the story. "My father wasn't the businessman I thought he was, Lewis. The money that paid for my racing career, it didn't come from his construction company like he always told me." Emma finished her bottle and Marcus lifted her to his shoulder, patting her back gently. The tender gesture reminded Lewis how young Marcus still was, only 39, same age as Lewis, but looking decades older from the weight of whatever he'd been carrying all these years. "What kind of money?" Lewis asked. "The kind that comes with strings attached." "Heavy strings." Marcus's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "They wanted me to do things in Formula One, fix races, share team secrets, pass information to betting syndicates." Lewis felt his blood run cold. Match-fixing scandals had rocked other sports, football, tennis, cricket, but Formula One had always seemed too complex, too unpredictable to manipulate. "So you walked away." "I had to." "But walking away from that world, it's not like quitting a normal job, Lewis. They don't just let you go and wish you well." "Is that why you're here in Monaco?" Marcus nodded, still patting Emma's back. "I thought if I came to where all the rich racers live, I could blend in somehow, find work on the yachts. Maybe use my racing background to get a job with one of the teams." But with Emma, he gestured helplessly at his daughter. "Where's her mother?" Pain flashed across Marcus's features like lightning. "Sarah died in childbirth. Complications the doctors said they could have prevented if we'd had better insurance, better care." His voice cracked. "She was the only good thing that happened to me in 20 years, and I lost her too." Lewis set down his tea, his mind racing. The racing world was smaller than people realized. Everyone knew everyone, and secrets had a way of spreading fast. But somehow, Marcus had managed to disappear completely for 2 decades. "Marcus, this organization your father was involved with, are they still active?" "More than ever. They've got their fingers in everything now. Football leagues across Europe, tennis tournaments, horse racing, even some Olympic sports." Marcus looked directly at Lewis for the first time since they'd arrived at the apartment. "And they're coming for Formula One eventually." "I know it. How do you know?" "Because they tried to recruit me again last month. That's the real reason I ended up on the streets with Emma. I told them no, again. They made sure I lost my job and apartment as a warning." Lewis felt ice in his veins. "What did they want you to do? Get close to current F1 drivers, learn their weaknesses, their secrets, their personal problems, feed them information they could use for betting or blackmail?" Marcus paused, his voice barely audible. "They specifically mentioned you, Lewis." The room fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing against her father's shoulder. Lewis felt the weight of 20 years of success and fame pressing down on him like a physical force. He had worked so hard to reach the top of his sport, fighting through racism, criticism, and countless obstacles. Now he was learning that shadowy forces had been circling Formula One like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. "What aren't you telling me?" Lewis asked quietly. "There's something else, isn't there?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at Lewis. His hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. There's a reason they think I can get close to F1 drivers, Lewis. It's not just because of my racing background or because we used to be friends. What do you mean? I mean they know something about my connection to the sport that even you don't. No, something I've never told anyone in 20 years. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper now, something that could destroy careers and reputations if it ever came out. Lewis leaned forward. Marcus, whatever it is, you can tell me. Can I? Because what I'm about to say might change how you look at your entire career, your championships, your success. Everything you've built. Marcus shifted Emma to his other arm. What if I told you that your first championship wasn't won fairly? What if I told you that people were pulling strings behind the scenes, making sure certain things happened? Before Lewis could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. As he read it, all the color drained from his face. What is it? Lewis asked. Marcus showed him the screen. The message was simple but terrifying. Nice apartment. Room with a view. You have 24 hours to reconsider our offer. They know where I am, Marcus whispered. They're coming. Lewis looked out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the harbor below. Every yacht, every boat, every person walking the marina was clearly visible from his apartment. If someone was watching, they'd have a perfect view of everything. Pack Emma's things, Lewis said, standing up quickly. We're leaving, now. The text message seemed to burn on Marcus's phone screen as they stared at it. Lewis felt his world shifting, like the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become quicksand. How did they find us so fast? Lewis asked, his mind racing. These people don't work like normal criminals, Lewis. They have connections everywhere. Police, government, even private security companies. Marcus was already gathering Emma's diaper bag with shaking hands. Money opens doors that should stay closed. Lewis immediately called his security team, but Marcus grabbed his wrist before he could dial. It won't matter. They probably already know about your security company. They might even have people inside it. Marcus's voice was urgent. We need to assume everyone is compromised. Then what do? We disappear. Right now, Marcus was checking Emma's carrier, making sure she was secure. I'm sorry I brought this to your door, Lewis. I should have known better than to think I could hide here. Stop. Lewis grabbed Marcus's arm. You're not going anywhere without me. This is my home, and nobody threatens my guests. But even as he said it, Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, the harbor spread out below like a postcard. Every yacht, every boat, every person walking the marina was clearly visible. If someone was watching his apartment, they'd have a perfect view of everything. Tell me more about this organization, Lewis said, pulling the curtains closed. Everything you know. Marcus sat down heavily, still holding Emma against his chest. They call themselves the Syndicate. Started in Denmark in the 1980s as a small betting operation. My father got involved when I was just a kid. How involved? He helped them fix local football matches at first. Small stuff. But they grew fast, spreading across Scandinavia, then all of Europe. Marcus's voice was barely audible. By the time I started racing, they were into everything: horse racing, tennis, even some Olympic events. Lewis thought about all the sports scandals he'd heard about over the years. Sudden retirements, unexpected defeats, athletes who seemed to lose their edge overnight. How many of those had been orchestrated? But Formula One was always their dream, Marcus continued. The biggest prize, billions of dollars in betting every season, watched by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Why is F1 so hard for them to control? Because it's so complex. 20 drivers, 10 teams, hundreds of variables in every race. You can't just pay off one person and guarantee a result. Marcus shifted Emma to his other arm. But they've been working on it for decades, placing people in key positions, building networks, waiting for the right moment. A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Lewis held up a hand, listening carefully, the soft ding of the elevator arriving at his floor. My security system should have alerted me if anyone was coming up, Lewis whispered, unless they disabled it, Marcus replied grimly. Lewis grabbed his phone and tried calling his head of security. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried the building's front desk. No answer. We need to go, now. Louis moved toward his bedroom safe, pulling out emergency cash and a second passport he kept for situations he'd hoped would never happen. 20 years in the public eye had taught him to always have an escape plan. Where can we go? Marcus asked, strapping Emma into her carrier with practice speed. I have a boat at the marina. We can reach the French coast in 2 hours, maybe find somewhere safe to figure this out. They moved quickly toward Louis's private elevator, but as the doors opened, Louis's blood turned to ice. Standing inside was a tall man in an expensive, dark suit, smiling like he was greeting old friends. He had pale skin, light hair, and cold blue eyes that reminded Louis of winter. Mr. Hamilton, the man said in a slight Scandinavian accent, my name is Erik Larson. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Louis stepped protectively in front of Marcus and Emma. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, you do. Marcus here has been telling stories, hasn't he? Making wild claims about organizations that don't exist, threats that were never made. Erik's smile never wavered. He's been having some mental health issues since his girlfriend died. Very sad situation. That's not true, Marcus said, but his voice shook. Isn't it? A former racing driver, living on the streets with a baby, spinning conspiracy theories about shadowy organizations. Who's going to believe that? Erik stepped out of the elevator, forcing them back into the apartment, especially when we have documented evidence of his psychological problems. Louis felt the trap closing around them. These people had thought of everything. What do you want? Louis asked. Simple. Marcus comes with us for a little chat. We help him get back on his feet, find him proper housing and a good job. All very legitimate and above board. Erik's eyes glittered like ice. In return, he helps us with some consulting work related to motorsport. And if he refuses, well, that would be unfortunate. Especially for little Emma here. Erik glanced at the baby sleeping in Marcus's arms. The Danish child welfare system can be quite aggressive when they receive reports about unfit parents. Homeless drug addicts with mental health problems rarely keep their children. Marcus made a sound that was half sob, half growl. Louis could see him breaking apart. You can't threaten a baby. Louis said, We're not threatening anyone, Mr. Hamilton. We're offering help to a man in crisis. Erik adjusted his expensive watch. The fact that you're here actually works out perfectly for us. We've been hoping to make your acquaintance. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. But you will be. You see, Marcus hasn't told you the most important part of his story yet. Have you, Marcus? Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Tell him, Erik continued pleasantly, about your real connection to Formula One, about why you really turned down that McLaren contract 20 years ago. About the secret you've been keeping all this time. I don't know what you mean, Marcus whispered. Of course you do. Tell Mr. Hamilton about the 2003 Formula 3 championship. Tell him how you really beat him for that title. Tell him about the races that were fixed to make sure you won. Louis felt the world tilt on its axis. That's not possible, isn't it? Marcus was there. He saw everything. He has the evidence. Erik turned to Marcus with that cold smile. Show him the photos. Marcus, show him the documents you've been carrying around for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to use them. Marcus looked at Louis with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never wanted you to find out this way. Louis stared at his former rival, feeling everything he thought he knew about his career crumbling around him. If Marcus had cheated to win that championship, it meant Louis's entire journey to Formula One had been built on a lie. Show him, Erik repeated, or I make some phone calls. And little Emma disappears into the system tonight. With shaking hands, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. Louis, he said, his voice breaking, there's something I should have told you 20 years ago. The silence in Louis's apartment was deafening. Emma had fallen asleep in Marcus's arms, completely unaware that her presence was being used as leverage in a game that stretched back decades. You're lying, Louis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Something in Marcus's expression told him there was truth hidden in whatever was about to come out. Show him, Erik repeated, his smile never wavering, or I make some calls, and little Emma disappears into the system tonight. With trembling hands, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn brown envelope. The edges were frayed from years of handling, and Lewis could see it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. Lewis. I never wanted. Marcus's voice cracked. I tried to forget about this for 20 years. I tried to pretend it never happened. What is it? Lewis asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Pictures, documents, bank records. Marcus's hands shook as he held the envelope from the 2003 Formula 3 season. Proof of what really happened that year. Lewis felt his knees go weak. That championship had launched his career. Losing it by 3 points had motivated him to work harder, to prove he belonged in Formula 1. Everything that came after, his McLaren drive, his world championships, his entire legacy had been built on the foundation of that defeat. This doesn't prove anything, Lewis said desperately. Look at the contents first, Eric suggested helpfully. Then decide what it proves. Marcus opened the envelope with the care of someone handling something precious and terrible. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough to see what was happening. Lewis recognized some of the locations, paddocks, from various Formula 3 races, hotel lobbies, restaurant parking lots. The first photo showed Marcus talking to a man in an expensive suit outside the Silverstone paddock. The man was handing Marcus an envelope. That's my father's business partner, Marcus whispered. The meeting was 2 days before the Silverstone race, the race where I had that tire failure, Lewis said, the memory flooding back. He had been leading with 5 laps to go when his rear tire exploded for no apparent reason. Look at the next one, Eric said. The second photo showed the same man talking to someone in racing overalls near Lewis's team garage. Lewis couldn't see the person's face, but he recognized the team colors. That's impossible, Lewis said. My mechanics would never. Your mechanics didn't know, Marcus said quietly. But someone with access to your car did. Someone who could make small changes that would cause problems at exactly the right moment. There were more photos. Marcus receiving envelopes of cash, meetings in dark corners of race paddocks, documents showing payments to shell companies with names Lewis didn't recognize. This still doesn't prove I lost because of cheating, Lewis said, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. Look at the race results, Eric said. Notice any patterns, races where you were leading but suddenly had problems. Mechanical failures that only happened when Marcus needed to win. Lewis's mind raced back through that season. The tire failure at Silverstone, the engine problem at Spa when he was dominating, the mysterious electrical issue at Monza that cost him pole position. At the time, he blamed bad luck and learned to push harder. My father made them do it, Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. He told me I had to win that championship or our family would lose everything. I was 18. Lewis, I didn't understand what it really meant, but you knew it was wrong. I knew something was wrong. The meetings, the money, the way certain things always seemed to go my way when I needed them most. Marcus looked down at Emma, but I was young and scared. And my father said it was just how racing worked at the highest level. Lewis felt sick. Every congratulation Marcus had received, every trophy ceremony, every interview about his natural talent, it had all been built on cheating. Why are you telling me this now? Lewis asked. Because they want me to do it again, Marcus said. The syndicate has been watching Formula 1 for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to move in. They think they can use me to get close to current drivers, to learn their weaknesses and secrets. And they specifically mentioned me. Lewis remembered. You're the biggest prize, Lewis. 8-time world champion, global superstar, voice for social change. If they can control you, they can control anyone. Marcus shifted Emma to his other arm. But more than that, they're planning something big. Something that will shake the entire sport. What kind of something? Eric checked his expensive watch. I think that's enough storytelling for tonight. Marcus, you're coming with us. We have a lot to discuss about your future consulting work. No, Lewis stepped forward. He's not going anywhere. Mr. Hamilton, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We're not asking for permission. Eric pulled out his phone. One call, and Emma goes into emergency custody. Marcus gets arrested for kidnapping, taking a child without proper documentation. You understand? And you get to explain to the world media why you were harboring a mentally unstable homeless man with a stolen baby. That's not what happened, isn't it? Who's going to believe the truth when we can create a much more convincing lie? Eric's smile turned predatory. We have lawyers, judges, social workers, and journalists all on our payroll. We can make any story we want become reality. Louis felt the walls closing in. These people had thought of everything. What do you really want? Louis asked. Simple. Marcus comes with us for a conversation about his future. In return, we help him get his life back together. Proper housing, steady job. Childcare for Emma. All very legitimate. Eric paused. And you, Mr. Hamilton, forget this conversation ever happened. And if I refuse, then we release those photos to the media. Your entire career gets called into question. Every championship you've won becomes tainted by the suggestion that your early success was built on someone else's cheating. Eric shrugged. Even if you personally did nothing wrong, the scandal will follow you forever. Louis looked at Marcus, who was staring down at his sleeping daughter with anguish written across his face. He had already lost 20 years of his life running from these people. Now they wanted to take his daughter too. There has to be another way, Louis said. There is, actually. Eric's smile widened. You could join our organization voluntarily. Provide us with information about other drivers, team strategies, inside knowledge that would be useful for our betting operations. Nothing too obvious, just small advantages that add up over time. You want me to help you fix races. We prefer to think of it as informed betting. Eric checked his watch again. You have 24 hours to decide, Mr. Hamilton. Tomorrow night at midnight. We want either your cooperation or Marcus comes with us permanently. And Emma. That depends entirely on how reasonable you both choose to be. As Eric moved toward the door, he paused and looked back at them. And don't think about running. We have people everywhere. Monaco, England, Switzerland, wherever you might go, we'll find you. And when we do, the price will be much higher. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Louis and Marcus alone with the devastating truth. Marcus was crying openly now, still holding Emma protectively. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never should have come to you. I made everything worse. Louis sank into a chair, staring at the photographs scattered on his coffee table. His entire understanding of his own career felt like it was crumbling. Tell me the whole truth, he said quietly. All of it. No more secrets. Marcus wiped his eyes with his free hand, still holding Emma close to his chest. The baby stirred slightly but remained asleep, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. The whole truth, Marcus repeated, his voice hollow. I'm not sure you want to hear it, Louis. It's worse than you think. It can't get much worse than learning my biggest rival cheated to beat me. Yes, it can. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, careful not to disturb Emma. Even with the curtains closed, he seemed nervous about being seen, because the cheating didn't stop with me. Louis felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? I mean the syndicate has been active in Formula One for longer than anyone realizes. The 2003 season wasn't their first attempt to control racing outcomes. It was just their most successful one up to that point. Marcus turned back to face Louis, his expression grim. My father started working with them in the late 1990s. At first, it was just about placing bets on races they thought they could predict. But they quickly realized that predicting wasn't as profitable as controlling. How long have they been fixing races, bits and pieces, since 1999? Nothing too obvious, just small interventions that would tip the odds in their favor. Marcus sat back down, adjusting Emma's position. A mechanic paid to make a tiny mistake during a pit stop. A marshal who might wave a yellow flag a few seconds too early or too late. Weather reports shared with certain teams before others got them. Louis thought about all the races he'd watched as a teenager, dreaming of his own Formula One career. How many of those results had been artificial? But they needed someone on the inside, Marcus continued. Someone who could win races legitimately most of the time, but throw specific ones when needed. That's where I came in. You were supposed to make it to Formula One. That was always the plan. Win the F3 championship to get credibility, move up through the ranks, eventually become their man in F1. Marcus's voice was barely audible. But I couldn't do it, Lewis. After I beat you for that title and saw what it did to you, I couldn't go through with the rest of it. Lewis remembered how devastated he'd been after losing that championship. He'd questioned everything: his talent, his dedication, his future in racing. It had taken months to rebuild his confidence. So you walked away. I tried too. But you don't just walk away from the syndicate. Marcus looked down at Emma. They've been hunting me ever since. Different countries, different names, different jobs. But they always find me eventually. A thought occurred to Lewis. If you've been running for 20 years, how did you end up with Sarah? How did you have Emma? Pain flashed across Marcus's features. Sarah was working at a marina in Denmark. 3 years ago, she didn't know anything about my past. For the first time in my life, I felt normal, happy. His voice cracked. We got married, had Emma. I thought maybe I had finally escaped. But they found you again, 6 months ago. Right after Emma was born, they said they'd been watching me, waiting to see if I'd settled down somewhere permanently. Marcus's hands were shaking again. They offered me the same deal as always: work for them, or lose everything I cared about. And Sarah died during childbirth because we couldn't afford the best medical care. The syndicate had made sure I could only get low-paying jobs, never anything stable or well-insured. Tears started flowing again. She died because of my past, Lewis. Because I was too much of a coward to face them 20 years ago. Lewis felt rage building in his chest. These people hadn't just corrupted races, they'd destroyed lives, torn apart families, caused the death of an innocent woman. That's why you came to Monaco, Lewis realized. You thought if you could get close to F1 drivers, maybe find a way to expose them. I thought if I could warn current drivers about what was coming, maybe together we could stop them. Marcus looked directly at Lewis. But I never expected to find you personally. And I never expected them to move so fast. Lewis stood up and started pacing through the closed curtains. He could hear the sounds of Monaco at night: cars on the street, music from distant parties, the gentle lapping of waves in the harbor. Normal life continuing while his world fell apart. There has to be something we can do, Lewis said. Some way to fight back against the syndicate. Lewis, they have judges, police officers, journalists, even government officials on their payroll. They've been building their network for 30 years. Then we find people they don't control. Like who? Lewis stopped pacing. An idea was forming in his mind: dangerous, probably crazy, but maybe their only chance. Like other drivers they've tried to recruit. Marcus looked confused. What do you mean? You said they've been planning this for 20 years. They must have approached other drivers over the years, right? Drivers who said no and kept quiet about it. Probably. But how would we find them? Lewis pulled out his phone. Because I think I know someone who might have had a similar conversation with these people. Someone who's been acting strange lately during drivers' meetings. Who? Sebastian Vettel. Marcus stared at him. The 4-time world champion. Lewis, you can't just call him up at 3 in the morning and ask if he's been approached by criminals. Watch me. Lewis was already scrolling through his contacts. Sebastian had retired from racing 2 years ago but still attended many F1 events. More importantly, he'd always been known for his integrity and moral compass. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Lewis, do you know what time it is? Sip. I need to ask you something important. Have you ever been approached by people calling themselves the syndicate? People who wanted you to fix races or provide inside information. There was a long pause. Lewis could hear Sebastian sitting up in bed. Where are you right now? Sebastian asked. His voice suddenly alert. My apartment in Monaco. Why, don't say another word over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere in 1 hour, Seb? What's going on? Just meet me at the old church above the harbor, the one that's usually empty at night. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed. The line went dead. Lewis stared at his phone, his heart racing. Well, Marcus asked. I think we just found our first ally, Lewis said. But he's scared too. Marcus shifted Emma to his other arm. Lewis, if we do this, if we try to fight them, there's no going back. They'll come after us with everything they have. They're already coming after us, at least this way. We're not going down without a fight. Lewis moved toward his bedroom to get changed. Pack Emma's things again. We're going to meet Sebastian, and then we're going to figure out how to destroy these people. And if we can." Louis paused in the doorway. "Then at least we'll know we tried to do the right thing." As Louis got dressed, his mind was already racing with possibilities. If Sebastian had been approached by the syndicate, there might be others. Other drivers, team principals, mechanics who'd been threatened or bribed. If they could find enough people, maybe they could build a coalition strong enough to fight back. But first, they had to survive the next 23 hours. Through the bedroom window, Louis could see the lights of the harbor below. Somewhere out there, Eric Larson was probably making phone calls, setting his plans in motion. The syndicate had spent decades building their network, and now they were ready to take control of Formula One. Louis had less than a day to stop them. He checked his watch, 3:17 a.m. In 20 hours and 43 minutes, he would have to choose between his integrity and everything he'd ever worked for, unless he could find a way to change the rules of the game entirely. The old church sat perched on a hill overlooking Monaco's harbor, its stone walls weathered by decades of Mediterranean wind and rain. At 4 a.m., it was completely empty except for the shadows cast by ancient pillars and stained glass windows. Louis arrived first, carrying Emma's car seat while Marcus walked beside him, constantly checking over his shoulder. They had taken a complicated route through Monaco's winding streets, doubling back several times to make sure they weren't followed. "I still think this is crazy," Marcus whispered as they approached the church entrance. "What if Sebastian doesn't come? What if this is a trap? Then we're no worse off than we were an hour ago," Louis replied, though his own nerves were on edge. The weight of everything they'd learned sat heavy on his shoulders. The church door creaked as they entered. Louis had chosen this place because it was one of the few locations in Monaco without security cameras, and the thick stone walls would block any electronic surveillance. If they were going to plan a resistance against the syndicate, they needed complete privacy. They didn't have to wait long. 5 minutes later, Sebastian Vettel slipped through the door, dressed in dark clothes with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The normally cheerful German looked serious and worried. "Louis," Sebastian said, embracing his fellow driver, "I hoped I'd never have to have this conversation with anyone. So they did approach you 3 years ago, right after I announced my retirement." Sebastian glanced around the empty church nervously. "They said they'd been watching me for years, waiting for the right moment." "What did they want?" "Information about current drivers. Personal details, weaknesses, financial problems. They said I could make millions just by sharing what I learned during my racing career." Sebastian's voice was grim. "When I refused, they made it clear the offer wouldn't stay on the table forever." Louis introduced Marcus and explained everything they'd learned about the syndicate's history and their current ultimatum. Sebastian listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. The 2003 Formula 3 championship was fixed. Sebastian asked Marcus, "You're certain?" Marcus nodded, pulling out the envelope of photos and documents. "I have proof, and it wasn't the only one." "This explains so much," Sebastian said, studying the evidence. Strange results that never made sense, mechanical failures that seemed too convenient, drivers who suddenly lost their edge for no apparent reason. "You think they've been active in Formula One itself?" Louis asked. "I'm almost certain of it. Remember the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix? Max was leading by 30 seconds when his engine failed on the last lap, handing the win to Pierre Gasly at massive odds." Louis remembered that race. The engine failure had seemed genuinely random at the time. "Or the 2021 Belgian Grand Prix," Sebastian continued. "That rainstorm appeared out of nowhere, causing exactly the kind of chaos that would benefit anyone who knew it was coming." "You think they can control the weather?" Marcus asked skeptically. "Not control it, but predict it better than anyone else. With enough money, you can buy the best meteorologists in the world, get satellite data before the teams do, maybe even seed clouds if you're desperate enough." Emma stirred in her car seat, making small sounds but not fully waking up. Marcus immediately knelt beside her, checking to make sure she was comfortable. The sight reminded Louis of what they were really fighting for, not just the integrity of racing, but the safety of innocent people like Emma and Sarah. "We need more allies," Louis said. Other drivers, team principals, mechanics who've been approached but said no. I might know someone, Sebastian said carefully, but this is dangerous territory. Lewis, if we start asking questions, the syndicate will know we're building a resistance. They already know we're not cooperating. Eric gave us 24 hours to decide, and we're spending that time planning to fight them. Sebastian checked his watch. That's less than 20 hours now. What's your plan? Lewis had been thinking about this during their walk to the church. We expose everything. Make it public before they can retaliate. Expose it how? They control journalists. Remember, not all of them. There have to be some reporters who can't be bought or threatened. And what about Emma? Marcus asked quietly. If we go public, they'll move against her immediately. Child services, false accusations. Maybe worse. Lewis felt the impossible weight of the choice they faced. Save the sport he loved and potentially doom an innocent baby, or protect Emma and let corruption consume Formula One. There might be another way, Sebastian said slowly. Someone I know who's been investigating sports corruption for years. Someone with connections to law enforcement agencies across Europe. Marie Dubois. She works for Interpol's Sports Integrity Unit. I met her 2 years ago when she was investigating match fixing in football. Can we trust her? She's the one who warned me that the syndicate might approach me eventually. She's been tracking them for years but could never get close enough to their Formula One operations. Sebastian pulled out his phone. I could call her. At 4 in the morning. This is her kind of emergency. While Sebastian made the call, Lewis walked to one of the church windows and looked out over Monaco. The harbor glittered below, filled with the yachts of the super-rich. It was beautiful and peaceful, completely at odds with the deadly game being played in its shadows. She's coming, Sebastian said, ending his call. She was already in Nice for another investigation. She'll be here in an hour. What did you tell her? That we have evidence of the biggest sports corruption scandal in European history, and we need protection for witnesses. Marcus looked up from Emma's car seat. Protection? What kind of protection? The kind that might keep your daughter safe while we bring down the people who killed her mother. For the first time since Lewis had found him on the street, Marcus's expression showed something other than fear and desperation. It showed hope. You really think we can stop them? Marcus asked. I think we have to try, Lewis replied. Because if we don't, they'll own Formula One within 5 years. Every race will be a lie. Every championship will be meaningless. And more drivers will end up like me, Marcus added, forced to choose between their integrity and their families. Sebastian was already making another call. I'm reaching out to other drivers I think might have been approached. If we're doing this, we need to do it right. As dawn began to break over Monaco, Lewis realized they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. In a few hours, they would either be heroes who saved their sport or fugitives running from one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Europe. But looking at Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, completely trusting the adults around her to keep her safe, Lewis knew they had made the right choice. The syndicate had spent 30 years building their network of corruption and control. Now 3 Formula One drivers and a baby were about to try to tear it all down. Lewis's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. TikTok, Mr. Hamilton. Hope you're making good choices. He showed the message to Sebastian and Marcus. 18 hours left, Sebastian said grimly. 18 hours to change everything, Lewis corrected. Outside, the sun was rising over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day in Monaco. Lewis just hoped they would all be alive to see the sunset. Marie Dubois arrived at the church just as the morning light began filtering through the stained glass windows. She was younger than Lewis had expected, maybe 35, with sharp green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their makeshift meeting place. Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Vettel, she said, shaking their hands. And you must be Marcus Anderson. I've been looking for you for 3 years. Marcus tensed, instinctively moving closer to Emma's car seat. Looking for me? Why? Because you're the only person who's ever walked away from the syndicate and lived to tell about it. That makes you incredibly valuable to my investigation. She sat down on one of the old wooden pews and opened a tablet computer. I've been tracking this organization since 2019, when unusual betting patterns started appearing in multiple sports. But Formula One has always been their ultimate target. How much do you know about their operations? Sebastian asked. More than I'd like, but not nearly enough to shut them down. Murray pulled up files on her tablet. They've infiltrated racing at every level: mechanics, marshals, even some team personnel. But they've been careful never to fix entire championships, just individual races when the betting odds were in their favor. Lewis felt sick thinking about all the races he'd won and lost over the years. How many of those results had been real? Can you protect Emma? Marcus asked urgently. They threatened to take her away if I don't cooperate. That's exactly why I'm here. Interpol has been waiting for an opportunity like this, as someone on the inside willing to testify. Murray looked directly at Marcus. But I need to know everything. Every name, every race, every document you have. Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his worn envelope. This is from 2003, but my father kept records going back to 1999. Names, payments, race results that were predetermined. As Marie examined the evidence, her expression grew more serious. This is incredible. We're looking at the biggest sports corruption scandal in modern history. What about the threat to Lewis? Sebastian asked. They want him to join their operation or they'll destroy his reputation. That's where things get complicated. Murray set down the documents. Legally, I can't act on Monaco soil without local cooperation, and the syndicate has connections in the Monaco police force. Lewis felt his heart sink. So you can't help us? I didn't say that. I said I can't act officially. Murray smiled for the first time since arriving. But I can help you disappear while we build a case strong enough to bring them down. Disappear where? Switzerland. We have a safe house near Geneva that's specifically designed for witnesses in international corruption cases. Full protection, medical care for Emma, and secure communications. For how long? Marcus asked. As long as it takes. Could be weeks. Could be months. Marie's expression was serious. But Marcus, if you testify, you'll be in danger for the rest of your life. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. They already killed Sarah. Marcus said quietly, and they're threatening Emma. I don't have anything left to lose. Sebastian's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He checked the number and his face went pale. It's Fernando Alonso, he said. He's not supposed to be in Monaco this week. Answer it, Lewis said, but be careful what you say. Sebastian put the phone on speaker. Fernando, what's going on? Sebastian, where are you? Fernando's voice was tense. I need to meet with you immediately. It's about some people who approached me yesterday. They mentioned your name. Lewis, Marcus, and Marie exchanged glances. What kind of people? Sebastian asked carefully. The kind that make offers you're supposed to accept. They said they knew you'd been contacted before, and that you might be changing your mind about cooperation. Where are you now? The hotel. Hermitage. But Sebastian, I think we're being watched. There are men in suits who've been following me since I left my room. Marie was already typing on her tablet, likely alerting her contacts about the escalating situation. Stay where you are, Sebastian said. Order room service. Don't leave your room. We'll figure something out. After ending the call, Murray looked grim. They're moving faster than expected. The syndicate must know you're building a resistance. How could they know? Lewis asked. Because they're professionals. They've been watching all of you for years. The moment you started reaching out to other drivers, they would have noticed the pattern. Emma began to wake up, making soft crying sounds. Marcus immediately lifted her from the car seat, holding her close. We need to move now, Marie said, standing up. I can have a helicopter here in 30 minutes to take you to the safe house. What about Fernando? Sebastian asked. We'll extract him too, but separately. The more people traveling together, the higher the risk of being spotted. Lewis's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but he had a feeling he knew who it was. Answer it, Marie said, but keep him talking as long as possible. Lewis put the phone on speaker. Eric Larson's cold voice filled the church. Mr. Hamilton, I trust you've had time to consider our offer. I'm still thinking about it. Really? Because our surveillance suggests you've been having some very interesting conversations this morning. Lewis felt ice in his veins. They had been watching. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about your meeting with Agent Du Bois. Yes, Mr. Hamilton, we know exactly who you're talking to. Marie was frantically typing on her tablet, likely calling for immediate backup. You seem to have made some poor choices, Eric continued. Mr. Alonso, for instance, such a talented driver. It would be unfortunate if something happened to him because of your stubbornness. Leave Fernando out of this. But he's already involved. You see, when you started building your little resistance movement, you forced our hand. Now we have to accelerate our timeline. What timeline? The timeline for taking complete control of Formula One. We were planning to move slowly, carefully, but thanks to your interference, we're going to have to be more dramatic. Marcus was rocking Emma gently, trying to keep her calm while listening to the conversation with growing horror. What are you planning? Lewis demanded. Tomorrow's Monaco Grand Prix will be very exciting. More exciting than anyone expects. Eric's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Multiple mechanical failures, several spectacular crashes, maybe even a fatality or two. The kind of chaos that will reshape the entire sport. Lewis realized with sick certainty what Eric was describing. They weren't just planning to fix the race, they were planning to destroy it. You can't do that. You'll kill innocent people. Only if you continue to resist. But if you and your friends surrender yourselves within the next 6 hours, we'll settle for a much quieter takeover. The line went dead, leaving them in stunned silence. 6 hours, Marie said grimly. We need to move right now, outside the church. Lewis could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching, but he wasn't sure if it was their rescue or the beginning of something much worse. The helicopter sound grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the ancient church. Marie was on her phone, speaking rapidly in French to someone Lewis couldn't hear clearly. That's not our helicopter, she said, ending her call with a worried expression. Our extraction team is still 15 minutes out. Then who is it? Sebastian asked, moving to one of the windows to look outside, through the stained glass. They could see a black helicopter circling the area around the church. It wasn't marked with any official symbols, and it was flying lower than normal air traffic would allow. They found us, Marcus whispered, instinctively holding Emma closer to his chest. The baby had gone back to sleep, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her. Marie was already gathering her equipment. There's a back exit through the old cemetery. If we move now, we can reach the woods before they land. But as they headed toward the rear of the church, Lewis's phone rang again. Eric Larson's number. Don't answer it, Marie warned. I have to. If I don't, they'll know we're running. Lewis put the phone on speaker again. What do you want now, Eric? Mr. Hamilton, I can see you're having trouble making decisions. Perhaps this will help focus your mind. Through the phone, they could hear another voice, panicked and frightened. Lewis. Is that you? It was Fernando Alonso. Fernando, are you okay? They took me from my hotel room. There are 4 of them, and they say if you don't surrender in the next hour, they're going to. Fernando's voice was cut off. You get the idea, Eric said smoothly. Mr. Alonso is perfectly safe for now, but his safety depends entirely on your cooperation. What do you want? Simple. You, Marcus, and whoever you're working with surrender yourselves. Come to the harbor, Pier 7, within 60 minutes. Bring all the evidence you've collected. And then what? Then we have a civilized conversation about the future of Formula One. And Mr. Alonso goes home safely. The line went dead. Through the window, they could see the black helicopter had landed in the field next to the church. We can't surrender, Marie said firmly. If you give yourselves up, you'll never be seen again. And Fernando will disappear too, regardless of what they promise. But if we don't, Fernando dies, Lewis said. Not necessarily. Marie was checking her weapon. A small pistol she'd pulled from her jacket. There might be another way. What kind of way? The kind that involves taking the fight to them instead of running away. Marie looked directly at Lewis. How well do you know Monaco's harbor? Very well. I've had a boat there for 10 years. Good, because I have an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane. Sebastian was still watching the helicopter. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide fast. They're unloading people from that helicopter, and they don't look friendly. Marie outlined her plan quickly. It was dangerous and required split-second timing, but it might be their only chance to save Fernando and stop the syndicate's plans for tomorrow's race. The Monaco Grand Prix is in 18 hours. She explained, if the syndicate is planning to sabotage it, they'll need to position their people tonight. That means their main force will be focused on the race circuit, not the harbor, so we use that distraction to rescue Fernando. More than that, we use it to capture Eric Larson and force him to call off tomorrow's operation. Marcus looked down at Emma, who was still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them. What about her? I can't bring a baby into a firefight. You're not coming with us, Marie said gently. There's a convent about 2 miles from here. The nuns have been helping Interpol protect witnesses for years. Emma will be safe there until this is over. I'm not leaving my daughter. You're not leaving her. You're protecting her. And you're the only one who can identify all the syndicate members from your father's records. Louis understood what Marie was really saying. Marcus was too valuable as a witness to risk in a rescue operation, but they needed him to point out the bad guys once they captured them. How do we get out of here without being seen? Sebastian asked. Marie pointed toward the back of the church, the old tunnel system. These churches were built during World War II with escape routes in case of bombing. The tunnel leads to the convent. As they gathered their things, Louis realized this might be the last time he saw Marcus and Emma. If the rescue mission went wrong, if Eric's men were too well armed or too prepared, Louis might not survive the next few hours. Marcus, he said, putting a hand on his former rival's shoulder, whatever happens, I want you to know I forgive you for 2003. You were just a kid trying to protect your family, and I want you to know that you earned everything you achieved after that. Your talent, your championships, your success, none of that was fake. They could hear voices outside the church now, men speaking in low tones as they approached the building. Time to go, Marie whispered. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Louis went first, followed by Marcus carrying Emma, then Sebastian, with Marie bringing up the rear. The walls were damp stone, and their footsteps echoed softly in the confined space. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, they emerged in the basement of the convent. 3 elderly nuns were waiting for them, as if they dealt with international fugitives every day. Sister Catherine will take care of Emma, Marie explained to Marcus. She's helped us protect dozens of children over the years. Marcus reluctantly handed his daughter to the nun, who immediately began cooing at the baby in French. Emma seemed comfortable, reaching up to touch the nun's gentle face. I'll be back for her, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll be waiting, Sister Catherine replied in accented English. As they prepared to leave for the harbor, Louis checked his watch. They had 43 minutes to reach Pier 7, rescue Fernando, and somehow stop a criminal organization that had been planning this moment for 20 years. Ready? Marie asked, checking her equipment one final time. Louis looked at Sebastian and Marcus, then back toward the room where Emma was now safely hidden. Let's go save our sport, he said. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher over Monaco, and the first tourists were beginning to arrive for tomorrow's Grand Prix. They had no idea that the race they'd come to see might never happen, or might become the deadliest day in Formula One history. The countdown to chaos had begun. Monaco's harbor glittered in the morning sun as Louis, Sebastian, Marcus, and Marie approached Pier 7 through the maze of luxury yachts and fishing boats. The area was unusually quiet for a Grand Prix weekend. Most tourists were still sleeping off their Friday night parties. Remember the plan, Marie whispered into her radio headset. Interpol teams are positioned around the harbor, but they can't move until we confirm Fernando's location. Louis felt his heart pounding as they walked down the wooden pier. His racing career had prepared him for split-second decisions and life-or-death situations. But this was different. This wasn't about winning a championship. This was about saving lives. There, Sebastian pointed toward a large white yacht anchored at the end of the pier, the Nordic Star. That has to be where they're holding Fernando. The yacht was impressive. Maybe 60 meters long, with tinted windows and sleek lines that screamed money and power. But what caught Lewis's attention were the two men in dark suits standing guard on the deck. "I count at least 4 guards visible," Maurice said quietly. "Probably more inside." "How do we know Fernando's really on that boat?" Marcus asked. Their answer came immediately. Erik Larsen appeared on the yacht's upper deck, holding a phone to his ear. Even from 50 meters away, Lewis could see his cold smile. "Mr. Hamilton." Erik's voice came through Lewis's phone. "Right on time. I do appreciate punctuality. Where's Fernando?" "Safe and sound. Would you like to see him?" A moment later, Fernando appeared on the deck, flanked by 2 large men, even from a distance. Lewis could see that his fellow driver looked scared but unharmed. "Now then," Erik continued, "let's discuss the terms of your surrender." "We're not surrendering," Lewis said firmly. "We're here to make a trade." "Oh, what could you possibly have that we want?" Marcus stepped forward, pulling out his envelope of documents. "20 years of evidence about your operations, names, dates, bank records, photographs. Everything my father documented about the syndicate." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Lewis could see Erik talking to someone else on the yacht's deck. "Interesting. But we already know what those documents contain. After all, we helped create most of them. But you don't know about the copies," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "The copies my father hid in safety deposit boxes across Europe. The copies that will be released to every major newspaper and law enforcement agency if anything happens to us." Lewis looked at Marcus in surprise. This wasn't part of Marie's plan. Marcus was improvising, and Lewis hoped he knew what he was doing. "You're bluffing," Erik said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Am I? Ask yourself this. Why do you think I survived 20 years of running from you? It wasn't luck. It was insurance." Marie was listening to something in her earpiece, then whispered urgently to Lewis. "My teams are in position. They've identified at least 8 syndicate members on nearby boats. This isn't just about Fernando, they're planning something bigger." "What kind of bigger?" Lewis asked. Before Marie could answer, Erik's voice came through the phone again. "Very well. We'll trade Mr. Alonso for the original documents, but just Marcus brings them alone." "That's not happening," Lewis said immediately. "Then Mr. Alonso takes a swim. And given that his hands are tied, I don't think he's much of a swimmer." Lewis felt rage building in his chest. These people had no limits, no conscience, no humanity. "I'll do it," Marcus said quietly. "I'll go." "Marcus, no. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap, but Fernando doesn't deserve to die because of my past." Marcus looked back toward Monaco, where his daughter was safe with the nuns. "And maybe it's time I stopped running." Sebastian grabbed Marcus's arm. "There has to be another way." "There is," Marie said suddenly, "but it requires perfect timing and a lot of luck," she explained quickly. Interpol had been tracking the syndicate's communications all morning. They weren't just planning to sabotage tomorrow's race, they were planning to use today's meeting as a distraction while their main team planted explosives around the Monaco circuit. Explosives. Lewis felt sick. "You mean they're planning to actually blow up the track?" "Not the track itself. The grandstands, with 50,000 spectators inside." Marie's face was grim. "They want to create a disaster so catastrophic that it reshapes all of motorsport. Gives them an excuse to take control of safety regulations, race scheduling, everything. That's mass murder. That's business to them. The insurance payouts alone would be worth billions, especially if they're the ones writing the policies." Lewis realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about corruption and racing anymore. This was terrorism disguised as an accident. How do we stop them? By capturing Erik and forcing him to call off the operation. But we need to do it without getting Fernando killed. Marcus was already walking toward the yacht, carrying the envelope of documents. Lewis watched his former rival, the man who had beaten him for a championship through cheating but had spent 20 years paying for that mistake, walking calmly toward what was probably his death. "He's buying us time," Marie said. "When they bring Fernando up to make the exchange, my snipers will have clear shots at the guards. And if they don't bring Fernando up, then we pray Marcus is as smart as I think he is." Lewis watched through binoculars as Marcus reached the yacht's gangway. The guards were professional, checking him for weapons, taking the envelope, speaking into radios. Everything seemed to be going according to their plan. Then Louis saw something that made his blood freeze. "Murray, look at the harbor entrance. Coming." Through the mouth of the harbor was another yacht, this one even larger than the Nordic Star, and behind it, 2 more boats filled with men in dark suits. It's not just a trade, Louis realized. It's an ambush. They never intended to let any of us leave. Murray was already shouting into her radio, calling for immediate backup. But Louis knew it would take time for additional forces to arrive, and they were about to be outnumbered 10-1. On the Nordic Star's deck, Marcus had reached Erik Larsen. Louis could see them talking, though he couldn't hear the conversation. Fernando was still flanked by guards, but he was alive and alert. Then Erik pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Marcus's head. Change of plans. Erik's voice came through Louis's phone, which was still connected. "Mr. Hamilton, you and your friends have 30 seconds to surrender completely, or I start shooting your allies one by one." Louis looked at Sebastian, then at Murray, who was coordinating frantically with her teams. 10 seconds, Erik announced. Louis made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of surrendering or waiting for backup, he started running toward the yacht. "Louis, what are you doing?" Sebastian shouted, but Louis was already halfway down the pier, his mind calculating angles and distances like he was approaching a racing corner at top speed. 20 years of Formula One had taught him that sometimes the only way to win was to do something nobody expected, even if it got him killed. Louis sprinted down the pier faster than he'd ever moved in his life. Behind him, he could hear Sebastian shouting and Murray yelling orders into her radio, but all Louis could focus on was the gun pointed at Marcus's head and the timer counting down in his mind. 20 yards from the yacht, Louis made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had. Instead of slowing down, he sped up and launched himself off the pier toward the Nordic Star's lower deck. The jump was impossible, too far, too high, with too much at stake. But 20 years of racing had taught Louis that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. He hit the yacht's railing hard, his ribs screaming in pain, but managed to pull himself over just as chaos erupted on the upper deck. "What the hell?" one of the guards shouted, spinning toward the sound of Louis's landing. That moment of distraction was all Murray's snipers needed. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the harbor as 2 guards on the upper deck dropped, their weapons clattering across the deck. But Erik still had his gun pressed against Marcus's temple. "Very dramatic, Mr. Hamilton," Erik called down to Louis, "but ultimately pointless. One more step and your friend dies." Louis found himself face to face with a guard on the lower deck, a massive man with cold eyes and hands that moved toward a shoulder holster. Louis had never been in a real fight in his life, but he had something the guard didn't expect: pure desperation. He tackled the man before the gun cleared its holster, and they crashed into the yacht's railing together. The guard was stronger and more experienced, but Louis was fighting for the lives of everyone he cared about. The gun went off during their struggle, the bullet flying harmlessly into the harbor water. Then Sebastian appeared, having made his own impossible jump from the pier. He brought a fire extinguisher down on the guard's head, ending the fight instantly. "Fernando!" Louis shouted up to the upper deck. "Can you move? My hands are tied, but I can run if I need to." On the upper deck, Marcus was talking to Erik in a voice so calm it was almost eerie. "You know, Erik, I've been thinking about something during our conversation." "Really? How fascinating." "What's that?" "I've been thinking about why my father really kept all those records. Why he documented every payment, every fixed race, every corrupt official." Erik's gun never wavered, but Louis could see confusion in his posture. "It wasn't for blackmail," Marcus continued. "It was for revenge. You see, my father never wanted to work for you. You forced him into it by threatening our family. And he spent 15 years planning how to destroy you. Your father is dead, yes, but his plan isn't. Those safety deposit boxes I mentioned, they're not just filled with evidence. They're filled with instructions, names, and addresses of every major news outlet in Europe. Contact information for law enforcement agencies, even the personal phone numbers of Formula One officials." Louis could see Erik's confidence starting to crack. If I don't check in with those banks every 6 months, Marcus said, the contents get released automatically. And it's been exactly 6 months since my last check-in. You're lying. Am I? Check your watch, Eric. What time is it? Eric glanced at his expensive watch, and in that split second of distraction, Fernando threw himself sideways off the deck into the harbor water below. The splash was enormous, and Eric spun toward the sound, giving Marcus the chance he'd been waiting for. He grabbed Eric's gun hand and twisted hard, sending the weapon skittering across the deck. But the fight wasn't over. More syndicate boats were approaching fast, and Lewis could see armed men preparing to board the Nordic Star. Murray, Lewis shouted, "Where's that backup?" 30 seconds out, came her reply from somewhere on the pier. 30 seconds they might not have. Then Lewis heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the roar of speedboat engines coming from the direction of the harp. Or entrance, not more syndicate boats, but official vessels flying the flags of Monaco Police and Interpol. The cavalry had arrived, but Eric wasn't finished. Even disarmed, he was still dangerous. He grabbed Marcus around the throat and started backing toward the yacht's rear deck. "This isn't over," Eric snarled. "Even if you stop me, the bombs are already in place. The Monaco Grand Prix will still become a graveyard." "What bombs?" Lewis demanded, climbing to the upper deck. "Did you really think this was just about capturing a few witnesses? We've spent months planting explosives around the circuit. Timer controlled, impossible to detect, set to go off during tomorrow's race." Lewis felt his blood turn to ice. 50,000 spectators, hundreds of drivers and crew members, all sitting on top of hidden bombs. Where are they? Scattered throughout the grandstands, under the track surface, even in the paddock area. You'll never find them all in time. Sebastian appeared on deck, dripping wet from pulling Fernando out of the harbor. "How do we disarm them?" "You don't. Only I have the deactivation codes, and I'm not sharing them." The Interpol boats were alongside the yacht now, armed agents swarming aboard. But Lewis realized with growing horror that capturing Eric might not be enough. "The codes," Lewis said desperately. "What do you want for the codes?" "My freedom, safe passage out of Europe, and a guarantee that all evidence against the syndicate disappears forever." "That's not happening," Marie said, joining them on deck with her weapon drawn. "Then 50,000 people die tomorrow. Your choice." Lewis looked around at the faces surrounding him. Marcus, who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth. Sebastian, who had risked his life to help. Fernando, who was shivering but alive. Marie, who had dedicated her career to fighting corruption. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, and now Eric was offering them an impossible choice: let the criminals go free, or watch thousands of innocent people die. But as Lewis stared at Eric's smug face, he realized there might be one more option. One final gambit that could save everyone. "You're right," Lewis said slowly. "We can't find all the bombs in time, but we can do something else." "What?" Lewis pulled out his phone and started dialing a number that would either save thousands of lives or destroy his reputation forever. "I'm calling the FIA. The Monaco Grand Prix is being cancelled." Eric's face went white. "You can't do that. The financial losses, the legal implications, the damage to Formula One's reputation will be nothing compared to the damage from 50,000 deaths." Lewis's call connected. "This is Lewis Hamilton. I need to speak to the race director immediately. We have a credible terrorist threat against tomorrow's Grand Prix." As Lewis explained the situation to Formula One officials, he watched Eric's confidence crumble. Without the race happening, the bombs were useless. Without the spectacular disaster they'd planned, the syndicate couldn't take control of the sport. "You've destroyed everything," Eric whispered. "No," Marcus said, finally free from Eric's grip. "We've saved everything that actually matters." As Interpol agents led Eric away in handcuffs, Lewis realized the countdown to chaos had become something else entirely. It had become the countdown to freedom. 3 months later, Lewis Hamilton stood in front of a packed press conference at the FIA headquarters in Geneva. The room was filled with journalists from around the world, all waiting to hear the full story of what the media had dubbed the Monaco conspiracy. The Monaco Grand Prix had eventually taken place 2 weeks after its original date, after bomb disposal experts from 5 countries had swept every inch of the circuit. They found 17 explosive devices hidden throughout the grandstands and paddock areas, enough to have killed thousands. Ladies and gentlemen, Lewis began, looking out at the sea of cameras and reporters. 3 months ago, I made a decision that probably saved thousands of lives. Today, I want to tell you why I made that choice and what it taught me about the sport we all love. In the front row sat Marcus Anderson, holding 6-month-old Emma on his lap. The Danish driver looked healthier than he had in years, with proper clothes and the kind of calm expression that comes from no longer running from shadows. Sebastian Vettel sat beside them, having come out of retirement to help with the investigation. Fernando Alonso was there too, fully recovered from his ordeal and now working with Interpol to identify other potential corruption in motorsport. The truth is, Lewis continued, our sport was under attack by people who saw it as nothing more than a way to make money through violence and fear. They were willing to murder thousands of innocent fans just to gain control of Formula One. That revelation had shocked the racing world. Eric Larson and 43 other syndicate members were now in prison across Europe, facing charges ranging from match fixing to conspiracy to commit terrorism. But this story isn't really about the criminals who tried to destroy our sport. It's about the people who saved it. Lewis looked directly at Marcus. 20 years ago, a young driver named Marcus Anderson was forced to make an impossible choice. He could win a championship through cheating, or watch his family suffer. Chose his family, like any of us would have done. The room was completely silent, every reporter hanging on Lewis's words. But Marcus spent the next 20 years paying for that choice. He lost his racing career, his home, the woman he loved. He lived in fear and poverty because he refused to help criminals take over Formula One. Marcus wiped away tears as Emma reached up to touch his face. When I found Marcus and his daughter homeless on the streets of Monaco, I could have driven past. I could have told myself it wasn't my problem. But I remembered something my father always told me, that how you treat people when they have nothing to offer you shows who you really are. Lewis paused, thinking about his father Anthony. The investigation had revealed that Anthony Hamilton had never been involved with the syndicate. The documents Marcus's father had kept were about other drivers, other races. The photos showing Lewis's father had been carefully doctored to look like evidence of corruption. The criminals tried to make me believe my father was corrupt, that my entire career was built on lies. But the real truth was simpler and more beautiful. My father was exactly the man I always believed him to be. The good person who taught his son to do the right thing, even when it's hard. The press conference continued for another hour, with Lewis explaining how the investigation had uncovered corruption attempts in multiple racing series across Europe. The syndicate's network had been vast and sophisticated, but it had one fatal flaw: it depended on good people staying quiet out of fear. When people stopped being afraid to speak up, the whole system collapsed. Lewis explained, that's the real lesson here. Evil only wins when good people do nothing. After the official press conference ended, Lewis walked with Marcus and Emma through Geneva's old town. It was a beautiful autumn day, with golden leaves falling from the trees and the lake sparkling in the distance. What will you do now? Lewis asked as they sat by the water's edge. Interpol has offered me a job, Marcus said, gently bouncing Emma on his knee, helping them investigate sports corruption. Turns out 20 years of running from criminals gives you some useful insights. And Emma, Marcus smiled, the first truly happy expression Lewis had seen from him. She'll grow up knowing her father helped save thousands of lives. I think Sarah would be proud of that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching boats move across the lake. In a few hours, Lewis would fly to Brazil for the next Grand Prix. The season was continuing, but Formula One had been forever changed by the events in Monaco. New security measures were in place. Background checks for all personnel had been strengthened. Most importantly, a new anonymous reporting system allowed anyone to report suspicious activity without fear of retaliation. Lewis, Marcus said suddenly, there's something I never told you. Something about that 2003 championship. Lewis tensed, not sure he wanted to hear another revelation. The truth is, I probably would have beaten you anyway. You were faster, but I was more consistent that season. The race fixing only affected 3 races out of 20. Are you saying I'm saying you would have won that championship if it had been completely fair. The syndicate's interference actually hurt you more than it helped me. Marcus looked directly at Lewis. You were robbed of a title you deserved, and I've carried that guilt for 20 years. Lewis stared out at the lake, processing this final piece of the puzzle. All these years, he'd thought losing that championship had motivated him to become better. Now he learned he should have won it in the first place. You know what? Lewis said finally. I'm glad it happened the way it did. What? Why? Because if I'd won that championship, I might have become comfortable. I might not have pushed myself as hard to reach Formula One, and I definitely wouldn't have been driving through Monaco at 2 a.m. 3 months ago. Marcus smiled. So you're saying losing to me was the best thing that ever happened to you? I'm saying that sometimes the things that seem like setbacks are actually setups for something better. Lewis stood up and stretched. Besides, I ended up with 8 world championships instead of one F3 title. I think I came out ahead. As they walked back toward the city center, Emma began to cry softly. Marcus immediately started making silly faces at her, and she stopped crying and began to giggle instead. She's going to be a heartbreaker when she grows up, Lewis observed. She's going to be whatever she wants to be, and she'll never have to worry about criminals threatening her family. As the sun set over Lake Geneva, Lewis realized that finding Marcus homeless in Monaco had led to the most important victory of his career. Not a racing victory, but something much more valuable, the knowledge that when it really mattered, he had chosen to do the right thing. The countdown to chaos had indeed become a countdown to freedom, and that freedom was worth more than any championship trophy could ever be. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. We share tales of real people making extraordinary choices that change the world around them. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family too. Stories like Marcus and Lewis's remind us that kindness and standing up for what's right can make all the difference. When we spread these messages of hope and courage, we help create a better world for everyone. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.